Brandon Smith is a cult hero. The hooker has spent the last couple of weeks in the headlines after being issued an infringement notice by the Roosters for missing a team meeting. Now, it's not the first player ever to miss a meeting, but because it's Brandon Smith and because he's a larrikin, it has turned into an absolute media storm. All of a sudden, there were rumours that the Roosters wanted to get rid of him, that he really never settled into the club, or that he was even going to the South Sydney Rabbitohs to replace Damien Cook, all over a missed meeting. We say we love characters in our game, and yet we turn on them the moment any slight thing goes wrong. And this guy is the greatest character in our game, with a remarkable story of ups, downs, and a crapload of resilience. Here is the real story of Brandon Smith. Brandon was born on Waiheke Island, a small island to the east of Auckland with a population of only around 8,000 people. It's one of the rare places in New Zealand where rugby league is the dominant sport, and the Smith family were no different. His dad hated the dominant rugby union culture in New Zealand, which was a driving factor behind Brandon starting to play rugby league from the age of 3. His dad worked behind the local club's bar while his mum worked in the canteen, and little Brandon would walk around selling raffle tickets to try and raise funds for the team. He played for the Waiheke Rams up to a point, but they no longer had his age group anymore, so he had to go play rugby league in Auckland. From age 9, he would leave school early at 2:30 to get the 3 PM ferry to the mainland just for training. Training would often end late, and if he missed the 7:15 ferry back to Waiheke, he'd have to wait until 8:45 for the next one. All in all, it was a 6-hour round trip multiple times a week just so he could train in rugby league. It was a level of love for the sport and commitment to playing it that's rare even amongst those that make it right to the very top. By age 13, when a lot of his junior teammates had been scouted by the Warriors, Brandon was still deemed too small to interest them. At this point, his older brother had been signed by the North Queensland Cowboys, so Brandon left his family having just become a teenager and moved to Townsville to live with his brother in search of an opportunity. He attended a rugby league school, and the Cowboys quickly took notice, signing him on a development contract for only $2,000 a year. But the money didn't matter much at this point, because this was the first moment where Brandon really felt that he had achieved what he'd set out to do in coming to Australia. And he was awestruck by the organisation that he'd become a part of. Whilst at the Cowboys under-20s, he snuck into Michael Morgan's locker, just because he viewed Morgan as the man. Whilst he was taking selfies with the locker and trying on all of the first grade gear, Michael Morgan walked in and caught him, and it became the running joke of the Cowboys under-20s. But there were struggles for Brandon in Townsville. Because his parents were overseas, there was no one really to keep him in line, and so he lived loose. He began hanging around crowds who were more interested in partying than really making anything of themselves, and he got into a few misdemeanor problems with them. Now, this behavior became an issue because it was around this time that his older brother was sacked by the Cowboys for being involved in a bar fight, meaning that he'd had to move elsewhere. This left Brandon in Townsville alone. His school arranged homestays for him, but his behaviour meant that he never stayed in one place for a very long time, going through 7 homestays during that period. And that did eventually manifest into something more. While still with the Cowboys under-20s, Smith was detained for pushing a police officer in defence of one of his mates at a house party. He was taken into custody, but had no legal guardian in Australia at that time, so there was no one there to come and pick him up, and he just had to wait until the police decided to eventually let him go. Once the Cowboys caught wind of that, they called him into a board meeting with his parents on the phone and sacked him. He was obviously devastated, as were his family. With nothing left for him in Townsville, he moved down to Brisbane where his brother was playing for Wynnum Manly. Wynnum were willing to sign him too, but wanted to use him as a hooker instead of his preferred position as a lock, and it proved a masterstroke. That season, Brandon won top try scorer of the competition from hooker and won the Malmaninga Cup Player of the Year. He was so impressive for Wynnum that the Cowboys called his parents back up and said that they wanted to sign him again. So he went back there and continued playing for the under-20s, making a point of playing to a level that repaid the second chance that the Cowboys had given him. And he absolutely excelled that season in the under-20s team that featured the likes of Cohen Hess, Brandon Hamlin-Uele, and Viliami Kikau. In 2016, he got a call from his parents that the Storm were interested in signing him, and as soon as he heard that Melbourne were keen, it was deal done on a 3-year contract. He still lived a little bit loose at the Storm, but Coach Craig Bellamy didn't care how much you partied or drank, as long as you came into training the next day and lived up to the standards that the Storm set. And Brandon was a player who did. In mid-2017, he was scheduled, as he was every week, to fly up to Brisbane to play for the Storm's feeder team at the time, the Sunshine Coast Falcons. But Bellamy told him not to, hinting that he may be in line for a first grade debut later that week. But his family were flying up to Brisbane to see him play in that fixture, so Brandon asked if he could go up and play anyway. He was allowed to, but broke a bone in his wrist during that game. When Smith got back to Melbourne, he hadn't yet told anyone about the soreness in his wrist, and before he could, he was told that he was making his debut. Rather than miss out on debuting, he did all he could to wrap up his wrist and hide the pain so that he could still play. As it turned out, the Storm had flown his parents over again so that they could watch his NRL debut, and he scored a textbook Brandon Smith try in that game as well. It was from 2018 onwards though that Brandon became a real staple of the Storm side. He played 18 games in that season, including a grand final loss to his former teammate Cooper Cronk and the Sydney Roosters. His character defined him in the squad, and he provided good vibes and high energy to complement the calculated professionals like Cameron Smith and Billy Slater. And in 2019, it was Brandon Smith no more, and the cheese was born. Brandon had made a line break, and in commentary, Andrew Johns said that his running style was like a runaway block of cheese. His career was never the same after that, becoming an absolute personality in the game, and he was recognised as one of the best impact players in the NRL. His role within the Storm was to bear the responsibility of going out there when all the boys looked exhausted and lifting their energy right back up again. It was a role that the NRL world noticed, and a star was born. His ability was recognised when he was selected for the Māori All-Stars and was awarded the Preston Campbell Medal for Player of the Match after scoring 2 tries to help them win the game. It was only revealed after the game that Cheese had broken his cheekbone 2 minutes into the fixture, which saw him ruled out for over a month. In 2020, the Storm had to move into a hub together up in Queensland due to COVID protocols, and it was an environment that Brandon absolutely thrived in. He was in his element, being able to hang around the boys 24/7, and it got the best out of him. He was instrumental that season for the Storm as a lock forward, taking them to an upset grand final win over the minor premiers, the Penrith Panthers. The little kid from Waiheke had hit the greatest heights that rugby league can offer. The Cheese had become the champ, and he made sure to let everyone know about it.
Talk to us, Cheese, talk to us.
Right, they try to sabotage cheese. I ain't no Philly cheese. I ain't no bubble cheese. Call me double C. I'm the champ cheese. Yeah!
And the following year, 2021, was yet another strong one for Brandon. Cameron Smith had retired, leaving the hooker jersey open, and Brandon took it with both hands. He won Dally M Hooker of the Year and scored 11 tries in that season, which is remarkable given that to date he has never scored more than 3 tries in any other season than that one. But he did come down from that high at the end of the year when a video was leaked to the media showing Smith along with teammates Cameron Munster and Chris Lewis partying whilst a substance that was allegedly cocaine was in the table between them. He absolutely stuffed up and it was tough for him. But Brandon really credits Coach Craig Bellamy for the way that he handled that situation, recognising that Brandon really needed a helping hand rather than anger and guilt. Bellamy told Smith that he didn't care what the fans, the media, or even his teammates had to say. He just said to him, "Go home, process what you've done, and make sure that you come back a better man." That moment, and Brandon's time with the Storm in general, absolutely changed him for the better. He said publicly, "I know 100% that I wouldn't be in the position I'm in right now if I didn't come play for the Storm." But with Harry Grant coming through and Cheese wanting to play hooker, he was forced to look elsewhere. In his words, the history and the prestige of the Sydney Roosters is what got him up to Bondi, where he finds himself now. And although he tactically struggled to fit in with the Roosters for much of 2023, he really found good chemistry with halves Luke Keary and Sam Walker in the back end of the year. And in 2024, that has continued. If you only watch NRL 360, you would think that he's going terribly this year. But if you actually judge players on their performance rather than their ability to drive people to click on articles, you'd see a very different story. His 1-2 punch with Connor Watson has been super effective for the Roosters this year, bringing them up into the top 4 at the time of recording. He's tackling well, he's kicking for more meters than he ever did before, and his service from dummy half is better than it has been in the whole of his career. Last week, up on the Central Coast, Smith played his first game back after the club dropped him for missing that meeting. It was a torrid night in absolutely torrential rainfall up against an informed Bulldogs. I was sat behind the Roosters bench for that game, and you could see the dialed in look in his eyes. It was the look that indicates absolute commitment to his play and to his teammates, and he had numerous moments in that game that proved that that was true. Brandon Smith is the greatest character in Rugby League. And as a game, while we absolutely love characters in the good times, we are 100% guilty of piling it on them in the bad times. Luckily, Brandon Smith has tougher skin than most, so it doesn't get to him. But to the media, you owe a duty to both Rugby League and to your employers. Characters like Brandon Smith get people engaged with the sport and in turn engaged with your publications. Tearing those characters down at every opportunity only causes harm to the sport that we love and to the community that gives you a platform. If you want nothing but perfect professionals with no personality playing the game, you will get it, because you will make sure that it is no longer worthwhile for players to be themselves. But don't go crying when you realise that our game is heaps better off with characters like Brandon Smith lighting up our TV screens.